Thanks, Samuel. Malia's list of books to read is certainly growing. And to be honest, Samuel, I don't think I would read a book called Malia either. We've been in this series, Little Big Shots, looking at the smaller books of the Bible that are sometimes glanced over, disregarded, or skipped. But I think no other book in the Old Testament gets more forgotten about than the shortest book in the Old Testament, Obadiah. 21 verses, 670 words. And the funny thing is, we actually don't know anything about Obadiah. We don't know when he was born. We don't know where he lived. We don't know who his parents are. And even though, as Samuel told us, that there are about 12 other Obadiahs mentioned in the Bible, this Obadiah is actually believed to not be any of them. We have no insight into him at all. But we do know that the 21 verses he wrote pack a big punch. And the book of Obadiah is unique. It doesn't deal with Judah or Israel much at all, and instead Obadiah focuses on the sin of Edom and the prophecies about the judgment that God was planning to bring upon them. The Edomites were this group of people who descended from Esau. And if you don't know who Esau was, come with me as we take a journey back to Genesis chapter 25. Once there were two twins. One was called Jacob, one was called Esau. And these two twins, well, they didn't get along. In fact, we've been told that they actually started fighting before they were born. Their dad, Isaac, son of Abraham, and their mum, Rebecca, became pregnant. And the boys tumbled and kicked inside her so much that Rebecca went to God to find out what was going on. And this is what God told her. He said, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples butting heads while still in your body. One people will overpower the other, and the older will serve the younger. The 2 boys were eventually born, and Esau came out first. But Jacob had this firm grip on his brother's heel. The Bible tells us that the twins even looked different. Esau's body was covered in so much red hair that he looked like he had clothes on, while Jacob's skin was smooth. And as they grew up, they became even more different. Esau, we're told, was a man of the field. He hunted animals. He spent time outdoors. I can picture him probably driving around in a Ford Ranger. And Isaac, his dad, being a big meat eater, favored him. On the other hand, his twin brother Jacob was quiet. He liked to stay indoors, probably doing jigsaw puzzles and watching Netflix. And Rebecca, well, she liked Jacob the best. He was a mama's boy. And we don't know much about Jacob and Esau as kids, but we do know that Esau was considered the oldest because he had this thing called a birthright. He would be in charge of their family, their land, money, everything that the family owned once Isaac passed away. Plus, Esau would be the one who would receive this blessing from Isaac. And all of this you think Esau would be excited about, but it turns out he wasn't. In fact, we read that Esau one day actually gave up his birthright. He just returned home from a hunting trip. He arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. And Esau says to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew you make. You know, my favorite meal." "All right," Jacob replies. "But first, trade me your rights as the firstborn son." "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" He reminds me a little about myself as a kid. "Mum, I'm hungry," always thinking with my stomach. So Jacob makes the stew, gives it to him and the bread. And Esau ate it and drank. He got up and left. And on oath, thinking with his stomach, Esau traded away his rights as the firstborn. Later on, when Isaac was older and on his deathbed, practically blind, Esau realized what he had done. He wanted the blessing that came with the birthright that was rightfully his. So at his father's instruction, he went hunting. He headed out to find meat to cook his father's favorite meal. But while he was gone, Rebekah overheard Esau and Isaac talking. She goes and finds Jacob and tells him, Look, Jacob, I'll prepare food for your father. You go put on a goat skin and pretend to be your brother. You go and get the blessing. Remember that Esau was a hairy man. So Jacob went. He put on the goat skin and did what his mother said. Jacob came and approached his father with the stew, pretending to be his brother. And Isaac proceeded to bless him, thinking he was Esau. And Isaac said this, From the dew of heaven and the richness of earth, may God always give you abundant harvests of grain and bountiful new wine. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed. And Jacob went on to be the father of the nation of Israel. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, Esau returned from his hunt. He prepared the meal and brought it to his father, but it was too late. He cried out a loud and bitter cry, and Isaac spoke these words over him. He said, You will live away from the richness of earth and away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by your sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you decide to break free, you will shake his yoke from your neck. We see this relationship between Edom and Israel stems right back to the story in Genesis. The lineage of the two brothers, Jacob, being later renamed by God Israel, and Esau was a long and stormy one. The founding fathers of both nations eventually reconciled when Esau returned to Canaan in Genesis 32, 20 years later, and everything seemed to be okay. But then we read in Obadiah that something obviously went wrong. We know that the brothers forgave each other. Esau forgave Jacob, but Esau's children never forgave Jacob. And his children's children never forgave Jacob. And we see their offspring continue to fight throughout the centuries. Historically and consistently, the Edomites had been kicking the Israelites when they were down. And God takes notice of it. He says, I see the way you've been treating the Israelites. You've been taking advantage of them. And God has had enough. So he holds them to account and sends this prophet Obadiah to speak out against the outlaw nation of Edom. And this is what Obadiah said to Edom. I will cut you down to size among the nations. You have been deceived by your own pride. But even if you soar as high as eagles and build your nest among the stars, I will bring you crashing down. Those who harvest grapes always leave a few for the poor, but your enemies will wipe you out completely. Every nook and cranny of Edom will be searched and looted. Every treasure will be found and taken. All your allies will turn against you. They will help to chase you from your land. And in fact, there are a number of things that God says about the Edomites, giving reasons for their pending doom. The first reason is that they refuse to help a brother in need. Time and time again, they rejoiced over the Israelites' misfortune. And in this prophecy, Obadiah says, when they, Israel, were invaded, you stood aloof, refusing to help them. Foreign invaders carried off their wealth, but you acted like one of Israel's enemies. You should not have gloated when they exiled your relatives to distant lands. You should not have rejoiced when the people of Judah suffered such misfortune. Secondly, the Edomites took advantage of God's people when they were down. Obadiah goes on to say, you should not have plundered the land of Israel when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have gloated over their destruction or seized their wealth. Finally, we learn from Obadiah that the Edomites were a proud nation. Just like their forefather Esau, they had no interest in the promises and the purposes of God. They were an independent and arrogant people, so independent that they thought they could do without God. And Obadiah in verse 3 strikes at the root of Edom's problem. He says, you have been deceived by your own pride. The Edomites believed themselves to be invincible due to this nearly uninhabitable territory that they dwelled in. No attacking army in no way could pry them out, and they knew it. They felt invulnerable, and this filled them with pride. They boasted about their geography, their surroundings, their natural defenses. They boasted about their reputation for wisdom and philosophy. They boasted about their political alliances and their allies. And as we just learnt, they boasted over Israel's distress and Israel's misfortune. Where for you might pride be an issue in your life? You see, the thing about pride is that it can be so difficult to see in the mirror, so hard to see on yourself, but it's so easy to see on other people. Yeah, it reminds me of the story that I once heard. An army colonel was sitting in his new office, having just received a promotion, when a private comes along and knocks on the door and says, "May I see you, sir?" The colonel replies, "Just a minute." And he'd just received a promotion, so wanting to look impressive, he picks up his telephone and says just loud enough so the man outside the door could hear, "Yes, Mr. President. I understand, Mr. President. We will take care of it right away, Mr. President." You see, he wasn't actually talking to the president, but he wanted to make it seem like he was. He wanted to appear bigger than he really was. The colonel goes on to say, "Mr. President, just give me 1 second." And then he turns to the door and calls for the private to come into his office. The private comes into his office and the colonel asks him to talk quickly because, well, he had the president on the line. "What can I do for you?" the colonel asked. "Well," the private said, "I just came in to connect your telephone." The moral of the story? Pride comes before a fall. In our culture today, pride has been elevated to a virtue. We're encouraged to take pride in our work, to take pride in our families, our Instagram feed, the number of houses we own, our finances, to take pride in our material possessions. And pride happens when we put our own ideas above the truth of God and His ways. Pride shows in the way that some people respond to authority. It drives others to act as though they're invincible themselves. Pride can show up in so many different ways, many of which feel so natural to us that we don't even seem to take notice. It shows itself in how we celebrate the downfall of others, or in the way we celebrate when others fail. And while it's not a bad thing to feel like you've accomplished something that you've worked hard for, we must be cautious in making a virtue out of pride, and instead embrace the virtue of humble obedience. humbly obeying Jesus. A freedom from pride that he's made possible by humbly serving us in his death, life, and resurrection. And that's what we find in Obadiah, that pride comes before the fall. But the warning is not just for the Edomites, it's for everyone. A major factor that determines our success or failure is whether we display pride or humility. Instead of depending on our own strength, we should, in humility, look to the Lord for help. So Grace City, let us be a church that chooses humility over pride, all because it is grace that rejects pride. Pride says, I deserve this. I alone worked for this. But grace says, I deserved none of this. Instead, God has given me all. Pride says, I owe nothing to anyone. But grace says instead, I owe much, and yet I was forgiven. Pride promotes self, but grace lets God do the promoting. Pride says, I know I'm right. But instead, grace says, well, actually, I could be wrong. Pride is always envious because it sees itself more worthy than the rest. But grace invokes only thankfulness and gives itself to those who deem themselves unworthy of it. Pride is impatient with faults because it fears rejection. But grace is patient and kind, for the love it gives is without condition. It is grace that rejects pride. As Obadiah moves into the second half of his prophecy, we see a promise of deliverance to the battered people of Israel, who at the time were in exile in Babylon. And Obadiah declares the exiles of Israel will return to their land. The captives from Jerusalem exiled will return home and resettle. Those who have been rescued will go to Mount Zion in Jerusalem to rule over the mountains of Edom, and the Lord himself will be king. And while Obadiah's prophecy is largely about the upcoming judgment and destruction of the Edomites because of their pride, he also promises that the day of salvation is near. To those who could understand what was being said at the time, this would come as an amazing and wonderfully welcoming news. Jerusalem was in ruin, the temple was reduced to rubble, and the people had been forced into exile, losing their national identity. But God promised restoration. We see that God's message has this upside as well as a downside. He is a God of justice and righteousness who must judge the ungodly. But he's also a God of love and mercy who longs to bless those who turn to him. And in this, Obadiah shows us that grace offers salvation. We can look at this prophecy of Obadiah through the lens of the New Testament. That the incarnation of God in the person Jesus, who came into this world at that very first Christmas, is the fulfillment of this prophecy. And it is Jesus who brings us salvation. It is Jesus who initiated God's kingdom upon earth, and he invites all of us to participate in it. Healing, grace, and love are open and available to us all. But there is one question, and the question is this. If the Lord is sovereign, and if the kingdom will be the Lord's, then is Jesus the King of your life? And are you a part of his kingdom? And through the words of Obadiah in this book, we ultimately see this overarching idea that grace rejects pride and offers salvation. We must always remember that God's announcements of judgment are always acts of grace. They are meant to be warnings that leave open a door to repentance and escape. And it's easy to see Obadiah's prophecy as something that's issued against those who we might consider our enemies. We read the words regarding the destruction of Edom and see it as a warning against those who refuse help, those who rebuke us or rejoice over our misfortune. And while there is an element of this, we shouldn't be too quick to exalt ourselves over others. After all, this is exactly what Edom did. Instead, we are called to live our lives differently. If we wish to live our lives in the way that God has intended for us, then we need to put down prideful arrogance and stubborn ways and instead fix our eyes on Christ. Fix our eyes on Jesus. And in this way, we live in the kingdom. We participate in it. And better yet, we invite others to experience it. You see, this is the way of Obadiah, and this is the way of Jesus. Because it was Jesus who showed us the ultimate display of grace. It was Jesus that took the cup of wrath that we deserved and drank it upon the cross. And that's why today that I want to suggest that grace is like an empty cup. A cup that has been fully drunk. This cup of wrath that was prophesied by Obadiah would ultimately be drunk by Jesus. So Obadiah could promise that God will bring deliverance and renewal in his kingdom for those who trusted in him. It was Jesus who showed the ultimate display of grace. Jesus, who moments before his death prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." It was Jesus who took what we deserved upon that cross. You see, Obadiah's little book warns us against pride, revenge, and bitterness. But ultimately, it reminds us that we serve a powerful, sovereign God who loves us, cares for us, and protects his children. And all because grace rejects pride and offers salvation. Maybe today you are one of two people. Maybe today you are someone who recognizes pride in different areas of your own life. And today you want to make the decision to turn from pride to humility. And if that's you today, I encourage you to pray this prayer with me. Jesus, I recognize pride in my life. Help me take the focus away from myself and to put it on you. Help me to be thankful, patient, and kind. Or maybe today you're a person that has heard about this gift of salvation that Jesus offers. You've heard about this empty cup that Jesus drank, and you want to step into a relationship with him. And if that is you today, I encourage you to pray this prayer with me. Jesus, thank you for what you did on the cross for me. Thank you for drinking the cup and showing us what grace looks like. I want to put my trust in you, Jesus, and be a part of your kingdom. Amen. And if you prayed either of those prayers today, I encourage you to reach out to one of our hosts online. We have people who are waiting and would love to chat with you, because this is just one small step in a lifelong journey with him.